Newly minted President Joe Biden wasted no time in getting to work on his first day in office, signing 17 executive orders shortly after stepping into the White House. Mr. Biden's executive actions include measures to rejoin the Paris Agreement on climate change, stop his predecessor Donald Trump's construction of the border wall, and mandate the wearing of face masks on federal property. Earlier in the day, Mr. Biden was sworn in as the 46th U.S. president to take charge of a deeply divided country reeling from the coronavirus pandemic. His number two, Kamala Harris, made history as the first woman and first person of color with Indian and Jamaican heritage to be sworn in as vice president. In his inaugural address, Mr. Biden urged for unity in the country and spoke of America's role on the world stage.
So here's my message to those beyond our borders. America has been tested, and we've come out stronger for it. We will repair our alliances and engage with the world once again, not to meet yesterday's challenges, but today's and tomorrow's challenges. And we'll lead not merely by the example of our power, but by the power of our example.
President Biden's inaugural speech is where we'll start our discussion with the Straits Times' foreign editor, Bhagya Srigareka. Bhagya, what were your main takeaways from Mr. Biden's inaugural address in terms of what he said, but also the shift in spirit, tone or message from Trump's speech 4 years ago?
Well, a couple of things really stood out. First, in Biden's speech, there was this clear sense of crisis. There is the pandemic that he has to deal with, the economic downturn, and also the sense that he needs to restore, the shine, America's shine in the world. The second thing I would say is this Biden's message, his repeated calls for unity throughout the speech. The November election, as we've discussed here on TBS a couple of times, it was quite bitter and it left the country very divided. So Mr. Biden, you saw, made a lot of emotive appeals to Americans to come together. Especially, I remember this phrase that he used about wanting to end this uncivil war. And then he also talked about politics. He said politics doesn't have to be a raging fire. So those struck in my mind. Overall, I think the speech had to have a lot of domestic concerns as its main points. But at one point, he did make a reference to America, how it relates to the rest of the world. He talked about repairing America's alliances with the world and engaging with the world. So this is where I think I was immediately reminded of the contrast with the Trump speech 4 years ago. So Trump, in his inaugural, talked about America first. So this difference is very stark. And then again, Trump's speech was quite grim, whereas I think Mr. Biden has been quite hopeful.
Bhagya, a busy few hours into the Biden presidency, now with him issuing 17 executive orders. This includes asking Americans to wear masks for 100 days and imposing a mask mandate on federal property. Now, he has also set a goal of giving 100 million shots of vaccine in the first 100 days of the administration. But beyond that, the mask wearing and vaccinations, could you describe Mr. Biden's task ahead of him to curb the virus spread?
The task actually is huge. If you, just the numbers. So the US, as we know, has the world's largest number of cases and the largest number of deaths. Of some 96 million cases in the world right now, 24 million are in the US. This week, the US passed the milestone of 400,000 COVID deaths. And in his speech, you heard Mr. Biden call for a moment of silence for the victims. So I think the magnitude of challenge is quite clear. There was one statistics that I came across about something about every 26 seconds, there is someone in the US is dying of COVID. And Biden in his first 100 days has talked about vaccinating 100 million people. So that is just huge. We have to see how he does it, but he has appointed people who will be in charge of this. He is mobilizing all kinds of effort. He's making sure enough money flows into the process. I think he has some offers come in from American companies as well, stepping up to help with this really huge challenge.
And on a related note, Bhagya, Mr. Biden also signed an executive order to stop the US's withdrawal from the World Health Organization. How will this help in the US's fight against COVID-19?
Well, first of all, what this does is it allows the US to re-engage with WHO. You know, under Mr. Trump, when the world's most powerful nation is outside the World Health Organization, I mean, it's mind-boggling. You know, WHO is the premier organization for public health issues across the world. And, you know, it makes a lot of sense for the US to be part of it. COVID is a common threat. You can't conquer it by just yourself alone, not even by closing all your borders, because you have to relate with the world. And that's why WHO being a key part of, you know, aligning the world together to face this common challenge is a big piece in Mr. Biden's, you know, domestic fight against COVID as well.
Right. But you're still on Mr. Biden's executive orders as well as reversing Trump's policies. Now, 9 of the president's first executive orders directly reverse Trump's policies, like the US rejoining the Paris Climate Accord. This was an expected move, but how significant is it? If anything, does it signal a return to policies that are based on science?
Yeah, so, you know, Mr. Biden's action on the Paris Accord is very welcome and very significant. So as we know, the Paris Accord is about how to limit global warming by curbing the greenhouse gases, the emissions that cause it. And so what Biden does with this step is that he is putting the US on a path to reach net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. This is, as the other countries are doing the same, they all have their own timetables. But the idea is that everybody is joined in this fight. And for the US itself, it's going to mean some pretty dramatic changes, you know, in their own energy policy. They have to tinker with things to make sure that in the end, there are no emissions from, you know, using coal or gas or oil. So pretty big changes there. And as you say, it is a return to science. So one of the criticisms against the Trump administration was that it was making policies which did not stand up to scientific scrutiny. So quite a few, there was this strand which seemed to have the president's ear or some kind of policy-making influence which denied climate change altogether and did not rate it as a big threat, called it a conspiracy even. So in that sense, it's a definite return to you know, a science-based policy.
Right. Bhagya, just to round up our discussion today, I want to focus on Mr. Biden himself. Now, he has referred to himself as a transition candidate, acting as a bridge to a younger generation of leadership. What do you think a Biden presidency will look like, especially with Kamala Harris as his VP?
So about the transition candidate, you know, he is 78, the oldest American president to take office. So given the age, it is a bit unlikely that there's going to be a second Biden term. So therefore, you know, during his presidency, the Democrats will have to come up with a leader. So in that sense, he's transitional. You know, as his vice president, you mentioned Kamala Harris. She could be that leader. It remains to be seen. She is the first woman vice president of the US, the first African-American in this post, and also the first Asian American. There are a lot of other Biden team members who are also diverse. You have an Asian American in his top trade official, Catherine Tai. So her parents were born in China and they moved to Taiwan before they came to the US. His nominee for the defense secretary, he's an African American, the first, if he gets the job, the first to be the first Black defense secretary for the US. He has several team members lined up who are Latin American. So diversity is one big part of it. And the second, I think, is expertise. When it comes to Asia, and because this is what we watch carefully, the top Asia man is Kurt Campbell. And he was part of the Obama administration. So the region knows him. there is expertise and there is experience is what he and other members bring to the fold. So I think from the Biden administration overall, you can expect pretty steady and consultative kind of American policy. So that is quite a contrast from policy making, that somewhat impulsive and unilateral policy making during the Trump era.
Right. Great insights there, Bhagya. Thank you so much for joining us for this post-inauguration discussion. I've been speaking to Bhagya Sri Gareka, foreign editor at the Straits Times. Meanwhile, world leaders, including Singapore's Prime Minister Hsien Loong, have offered their congratulations to new US President. In his letter to Mr. Biden, Mr. Lee wrote, "You can continue to rely on Singapore as a consistent and reliable friend and partner as we advance our country's shared interests and deal with common challenges." Now, wishing Mr. Biden well, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said that the two countries have tackled some of history's greatest challenges together. And the White House announced that President Biden's first call to a foreign leader will be to Mr. Trudeau on Friday. And China's Foreign Ministry spokesperson Hua Chunying said yesterday that the Biden administration should look at China rationally and objectively, meet China halfway and push relations back on the right track.